Hello again, I'm Travis Lane, and this is my second book review for 2020. In my reading queue, I try to prioritize as much as possible books that I've received as gifts. I figure if someone was interested or influenced enough by a book to give it to me for free, I owe them the honor of putting it high on my list. My older brother gave me Ayn Rand's The Fountainhead, which has been very influential and impactful on him and his personal beliefs and life philosophy. I thank him for the gift, and the conversations we've had along the way, and the conversations that we're certain to have more of after this. The Fountainhead is a complex and influential work. It's very likely that you've heard of Ayn Rand, or at least her later title Atlas Shrugged, which followed The Fountainhead by 14 years, as her work shaped a generation of typically conservative politicians through the 1960s and 70s, and came back into sharp focus more recently in the early Obama administration during the Tea Party movement. In other words, you may already have a preconceived notion of Ayn Rand, her works, or her philosophy without having ever held a copy of The Fountainhead or Atlas Shrugged in your hands, much less having read them cover to cover. I'm breaking my review of The Fountainhead up into two parts. What you're watching now is my assessment of the book as a work of fiction with obvious philosophical underpinnings. The second part, linked in the description below, provides a little deeper look into the philosophy of Ayn Rand that she portrays throughout the book, with some more supplemental references from her other works, interviews, and other outside resources. Anyway, this has been a complex intro, but this is a complex work by a complex author, and it deserves a little bit of setup. But now, let's turn to the book. The Fountainhead is a book about the twists and turns of the life and career of fiercely independent and competent architect Howard Roark operating in 1920s and 30s America. The book is broken up into 4 parts, each focusing on a key character of the story, although it progresses in chronological order with characters appearing or disappearing even inside of their own parts. In my read, The Fountainhead succeeded in several key areas. First, the story is strongly character-driven. Rand's writing, as a work of fiction, is more gripping than many other fictional stories set in the real world. The cast is well-defined, without being wooden or fake, and character change happens organically and interestingly. Some people change dramatically throughout the book, while others are stone pillars, and there are many that are in between. The characters are introduced in a proper pace to progress the story naturally, without relying on any arbitrary events or things that feel out of place or unnatural. Second, while it's clear that Rand's philosophy is on display throughout the book, the actual events that happen in the story are fairly realistic. The heroes don't always win, or agree with each other, or work together. Each character feels alive and integral to the story, sometimes carrying an advantage, sometimes being surprised by events outside of their vision or control. It keeps us invested in the story, not knowing what will happen next or what will happen in the end. There were many of those fun, ooh moments that a reader expects of a good work of fiction. The third area it succeeds is in stimulating self-reflection. It's impossible to read The Fountainhead without thinking, what would I have done in this situation? Or who do I identify with most here? In this way, and I think this was Rand's purpose, the philosophy emerges naturally from the story. It has some definite weaknesses as well. The last 100 to 150 pages are a bit ranty. 3/4 of the story does not necessarily have a definite villain, but when it finally becomes clear who the villain is and what their motivation is, it takes the form of an 8-page monologue that would be at home in some chintzy Hollywood script, fully with the ominous music heavy on the minor keys and the ominous lighting heavy on the shadows. Similarly, the hero's last stand is well written and powerful, but does not emerge naturally from previous character development and feels, unfortunately, like the most unrealistic part. Additionally, and I may be influenced by 80 years of culture change since the book was published, but many of the romances make absolutely no sense to me. Often, the relationships are not just odd, but grating. In closing, I strongly recommend reading this book for yourself. It stands the test of time both as a work of character-driven fiction and as a vessel for a controversial but timelessly influential philosophy. It's not perfect in either respect, but it's strong in both. The decades-long notoriety of the author and her works attests to this, and is a reputation well-earned, if not often deeply misinterpreted. I will also say that Atlas Shrugged Rand's later work that was published 14 years after The Fountainhead is also on my reading list for the year. I will do my best to revisit these thoughts when I can slog my way through that hefty tome. I find it ironic, or maybe appropriate, that I read this after Gordon Marino's The Existentialist Survival Guide, a book about finding meaning and reprieve in your own purpose in life. Ayn Rand said, "My philosophy, in essence, is the concept of man as a heroic being, with his own happiness as the moral purpose of his life, with productive achievement as his noblest activity, and reason as his only absolute." In other words, while Kierkegaard called freedom of choice dizzying and a font of anxiety, Rand would say that same creative freedom is an exhilarating clarion call to answer the greatest question for any man, the question of his purpose. Though in many, many ways, Rand's objectivism would be diametrically opposed to Kierkegaard's and Marino's existentialism, one common message emerges: finding your individual purpose and authentically pursuing it. And it's a good read, too. Thank you so much for watching my second book review of the year. As I mentioned at the beginning, I'm splitting my review of The Fountainhead into two parts. What you're watching now is a review of the book as a work of fiction, and the second part, which will be linked in the description below, is a deeper dive into the philosophy of objectivism. If you're interested in buying the book for yourself, there is an Amazon link in the description as well. Again, that's an affiliates link, costs you nothing extra, but gives me a small kickback for the reference. The version that was purchased for me was a 2-pack with The Fountainhead and Atlas Shrugged in combination. Can't recommend Atlas Shrugged yet, but I can definitely recommend The Fountainhead, and I'll be revisiting Atlas Shrugged when I get the chance. It would also be very helpful if you would like and subscribe to my channel if you'd like to see more like this. And as always, I appreciate it very much. Thank you for watching.